Welcome back, everybody. And it's hard to believe that we gathered less than 24 hours ago to start this year's Canadian Global Oncology Workshop. And we have seen such incredible, thoughtful, thought-provoking, and inspiring presentations, given us a lot to think about as we engage in our work, engage with our partners, and all work together to improve equity in global cancer care. I think a couple of things. For those of you who weren't able to see all of the presentations, we have recorded them all and we'll be posting them. But in addition to that, we're now going to welcome representatives from each of the major sessions to present summaries. I think the other thing is we've had incredible sessions, but I've really enjoyed the networking sessions as well. In both last evening's networking session and in today's midday break, it was really great to reconnect with some old colleagues, meet some new friends and colleagues of the future, and to have some really thoughtful discussions in smaller groups. And it's really complemented the sessions very well. So thanks to all of you for being so engaged in those networking sessions. That was a lot of fun. So I think we're going to start with Dr. Danielle Rodan, who's going to give a brief summary of our initial session last night on global health equity, a shared challenge. Welcome, Danielle, or welcome back, Danielle.
Thanks so much, Scott. It's really been a wonderful 2 days. I'm going to just give an overview of our first session on global health equity. And the session started with a presentation by Dr. Jane Philpott, where she explored the concepts around unearned privilege and the need to be reflective about our motivation for engaging in global health. Really speaking from her own experience, she talked about the burden of participation in research for marginalized communities and the need to ensure that the costs and benefits of this work are being fairly shared. And finally, she talked about Stephanie Nixon's work on the practice of allyship and the need to become good listeners and our obligation to act on what we hear or what we learn with a sense of cultural humility. Dr. Latondra then applied our discussion of health equity to Indigenous peoples in Canada. She discussed key events that have affected the health of Indigenous peoples and spoke about the concepts of intersectionality and the impact of structures of power and interdependent systems of privilege and oppression from colonialism, imperialism, and racism. And she stressed the need to approach the concepts of health equity through an Indigenous lens, which considers the importance of land, language, and community. Dr. Denberg then reflected on how the most commonly used definitions of global health do not account for the impact of power, systems, and ideology. And he talked about the need to move from a hierarchical conception of duties to a relational understanding of responsibility to others, and how this practice of relationality is based on our duty to those in need, regardless of geography, as a result of these systems of oppression that we've engendered and from which we continue to benefit. And about how specific local or international commitments can grow from different experience and attachment, and that their legitimacy rests in how we nurture them and carry them out, and not just linked to geography. And our final speaker in the panel, Dr. Lofters, addressed the nexus between improving health equity in Canada and improving health equity in low and middle income countries through the lens of cervical cancer. She talked about major global inequalities and incidence and mortality, which we heard more about today, around cervical cancer between countries. But she also showed in her work that here in Canada, there is a 50% absolute difference in cervical cancer screening rates between young, high-income Canadian women with primary care and older South Asian immigrants not in primary care. And how similar disparities have also been seen in mortality rates from COVID, whereby the proportion of minority and Black residents has been directly linked to rates of mortality from COVID. And she stressed that attention is needed both locally and internationally, and that we don't have to choose one or the other. And how through the example of HPV self-sampling, there's opportunities for mutual learning around the importance of community and voice and expertise, the need to build trust and meaningful partnerships, and understanding of systemic marginalization and humility. And I think in our panel discussion that followed, the importance of stories and relationships in our work in global health was really stressed, and the need for a restructuring of traditional promotion metrics for academics in this field, which have tended to value quantity of publications rather than the quality and impact of the work that's being done. So it was a really wonderful session with some very inspiring panelists, and I'll turn it over to our next speaker for the next report back.
Thanks very much, Danielle. And yeah, thank you. Next, we have Dr. Puneet Bains, who's going to talk to us about the session on racism and coloniality in global cancer control.
Thank you, Scott, and good afternoon, everyone. What a great workshop over the past day and a half. So this morning, we had a powerful discussion on racism and coloniality. We've also heard this theme throughout all of the sessions. And I would again like to thank Drs. Astana, Nodima Para, Hamad, Mutebi, Lana James, and also the steering committee, and of course, Laura Carson, whom this meeting without would not have happened. So in summary of this morning's session, a lot was shared. It was quite a powerful session, but ideas were shared, and we need to take this wisdom to guide us. We must step up with courage. Vitamin C, as many of us heard, take this courage. We must have hard conversations and look inwards to evoke change. We need to self-reflect at the individual level first, before moving on to the institutional and beyond. The language and colonial mentality of inferiority needs to be lifted. The thought that colonial approaches to global healthcare are defunct is brushing it under the rug, and those marginalized, including patients, providers, and investigators, would beg to differ. We do not need to be a voice for them. Let's provide and create an environment where their voices, work, and research are heard and valued. Organizations need to lean out. We need to dig deeper, excavate. We need to acknowledge race medicine deeply embedded in Canada also, including down to our infrastructure and data systems. And we need to question, we need to ask why. So we need to be aware and recognize that this exists, and importantly, we need to evoke change. So these are a summary of thoughts put forth by all of our amazing panelists this morning. And I challenge everybody to self-reflect and take these important comments home. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks very much, Puneet. And now we're going to have Dr. Simon Sutcliffe, who's going to summarize the session on universal health coverage and its relevance to global cancer control.
I think Simon just might be having a little trouble joining, so I'm going to suggest we move on to Dr. Zeev Rosberger.
Okay, well, we'll put Simon next, but Dr. Zeev Rosberger is going to summarize the session on cervical cancer elimination, achievable global health goal.
I needed 2 more minutes to get ready, but it's okay. For Simon, I'll jump in. We had a very interesting and what can I say, very inspiring session with 3 very important global leaders in cervical cancer prevention. And the things that we, I think, learned were quite clear. We have an opportunity to eliminate a particular cancer worldwide. Unfortunately, the technologies, the treatments, the prevention strategies are still most likely to be acquired and distributed in high-income countries. And that's not where the prevalence of disease is at this point, but in low and middle-income countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, and so forth. And Dr. Nono from the WHO, who is leading this elimination strategy of 90% vaccination coverage of girls up to age 15 worldwide, 70% with at least one high sensitivity HPV screening test between the ages of 35 and 45, and 90% treatment of precancerous lesions and treatment of invasive cancers as the goal for 2030, which was announced 2 years ago by the WHO. From a high level, Dr. Nono talked about the strategy, the implementation programs that are being funded on the ground across the world, and the importance of education and the implications of innovation. We have now more vaccines coming down the pipeline, which should bring down the cost. The Chinese bivalent vaccine is now has now been approved, and there are others coming down the pipeline as well. Other technologies that could be implemented that are more sensitive and using AI innovation and other technologies to do screening in the field without the use of using smartphones and pictures and the ability to differentiate between high and low grade lesions, cervical lesions, without the use of internet or satellite phones is coming. This technology is coming and could lead to more efficient screening and diagnosis. The round that I think were of great interest, Dr. Castro spoke about the vaccination program for adolescent girls in Colombia and the challenges that occurred from 2012 when they had up to over 90% uptake of the vaccine, to the point where a couple of years later there was a downturn to about a 2% uptake because of, I didn't quite hear the whole story because the sound wasn't coming through well, but I think I'm aware that it was a celebrity who came on and really dissed the vaccine, and this took on a life of its own and really impeded uptake. He has worked very hard on the ground with partners in regions of high cervical cancer incidence, and the principles on the supply side of listening, of community involvement, of social mobilization on the ground, using focus groups, and being authentic in the field, listening and compromise. And I think this we heard also from Gina and her work in Uganda, where she's been working for, I believe, over 15 years in bringing to very remote regions screening and doing implementation science and research. As researchers, we need to be very conscientious of all of the issues that have come up around equity, around colonialism, racism, etc. reflection. I've certainly learned a lot about that in the last day and a half myself in very strong ways. And that any implementation project needs to, as Gina put so well, needs to address the demand side, the equity, the poverty, the stigma, access, and what the communities on the ground are asking. What are the questions they're asking? What are the targets they are developing, and how we can meet those needs in a very sustainable way, so that it's not one and done and out of the community. The other point that I think is worth stating was the call by Dr. Similela about the relationship between the family of Henrietta Lacks and the whole story of the HeLa cells and how her cells have contributed over the decades to the advancements in cervical cancer, understanding the evolution of cervical cancer and treatment and prevention. And she made the point that we should consider at each presentation that we should say her name, that we should not forget that this person of color who was really has made indirectly significant contributions to the field, but from a different space. So it was a very productive session, and I'll let Simon continue with his. Thank you.
And can you hear me? Do you hear
Thanks.
me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Simon. And
Good.
thanks very much, Zeev. I know we put a lot of pressure on the folks who had sessions this afternoon to get their summaries ready, but that was an excellent session, excellent summary, and it's interesting to see how the similar themes resonate through many of these presentations.
Correct.
So thank you, Scott. Our session was on universal healthcare and cancer control. I'm not going to actually speak to the presentations of the speakers per se, but really address three major areas for us to think about. Universal healthcare and its relation to global health systems, universal healthcare in relation to cancer control, and finally, for us to think about universal healthcare and cancer control in relation to the Canadian Global Oncology Network. What does it mean to us? So we had three excellent speakers, and they gave us a clear understanding of universal healthcare, the principle of assured access to healthcare for all without exclusion based on disparities or financial means, a principle embedded in the Sustainable Development Goals. The case has never been stronger for UHC, the principle more acknowledged, but with the recognition of how universal healthcare can be implemented in health systems where out-of-pocket health expenditure is often the dominant component of access to care. Opportunities to advance universal healthcare include strengthening the investment case beyond the traditional health financing and employment-based schemes, progressive universalism, increasing depth, scale, value, integration, and innovation to demonstrate fair distribution of care across the population, and expanded coverage of the population. And it was noted we should not allow COVID-19 to distract us as an acute healthcare crisis from progress to universal healthcare, but rather to focus on how COVID-19 has established precedents and incentives that release us to address progress towards universal healthcare. Now, on the topic of universal healthcare in relation to cancer control, all speakers, particularly Dr. Ilwahi, built the case for cancer control as a model for universal healthcare, showing that universal healthcare is a financially achievable system in LMIC, that it has demonstrably improved outcomes and promotes equity and financial protection, that it mitigates the moral, financial, societal, gender, and personal hardships of cancer, and has a demonstrable financial business case, and relative to other investments, it is an achievable good buy, particularly against those investments that favor prevention or early detection of cancer. Indeed, as he states, universal healthcare cannot be achieved without cancer control, and the failure to invest in healthcare would inhibit the country's economic and societal development. Cancer care is integral to the path of universal healthcare. Dr. Rizal Uriel spoke to the actual implementation of universal healthcare, specifically in relation to cancer control in the Philippines, and really laid out the implementation plan that turns strategy into action at a population level, identifying understanding the burden of cancer, the importance of data, the need for strategy, establishing access to available and affordable services, prioritizing and phasing the interventions, ensuring the consistency and quality of the interventions within the plan, a framework for access to medicines, the importance of policy, legislation, and good governance, including financial commitment and budget, and system performance measurement to demonstrate the impact and value of the interventions. All speakers stressed the importance of momentum, recognizing the challenge of maintaining resolve, political, professional, and societal resolve, establishing and securing stable funding, and the importance of leadership, and the challenge of leadership change and impact on priorities and progress. Also, the importance of telling the story, looking at the investment in universal healthcare as such, an investment in the society and the economy of the country, an investment in the health, productivity, longevity, stability, and well-being of the population, and that universal healthcare and cancer control is essentially investment by society into society. And that leaves us then with item number 3, which is universal healthcare and cancer control in relation to the Canadian Global Oncology Network. And I won't say more other than the real purpose of our coming together is to think about how we place ourselves in the context of collaboration in these components. And I'm sure that is something that will get due consideration from now on. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Simon, for that very thoughtful summary, and in particular for putting it in the context of the Canadian Global Oncology Network. And Danielle will be speaking a little bit more about how all of today's meeting can be put into that context very soon. And now for our final summary, Dr. Fabio Moraes is going to tell us about the final session of today, Digital Health and Global Oncology.
Thank you. I think it's the most recent session, so might be very fresh on everybody's mind. But at this exciting and optimistic session on digital health and oncology, our speaker, Dave Jeffrey, and our panelists, Dr. Lazabikan, Dr. Berlin, Argoal, and Dr. Spency, they discussed the unprecedented growth in the technology capability and how it will impact global oncology. That included discussion on personalization, populational impact, and how it's going to generate more interactions and need for redeveloping and rethinking healthcare. We also explored the potential of digital technologies and AI to accelerate the progress in global oncology. We also brought the discussion on how virtual care disrupted access to care in the last couple of years, and how it can make our access to specialized care better and faster. We also discussed how to mitigate challenges in implementing technologies in global oncology, and we reviewed some real-world examples on how to do that. We discussed the need for a data-driven approach and the need of actions on evaluation and implementation of new technologies. And finally, I was touched by the key message brought to us by Dr. Jeffrey that said, the local and global burden of cancer is massive and growing. Technology will make it even more visible, make it undeniable, make the results of our inaction predictable. So we must act now and ensure we balance innovation with the development of infrastructure and capacity building globally. Thank you, and that's the summary for our session.